On the 1st of August, the United States will implement a 30% tariff on all South African exports, coined Liberation Day by Washington. And it seems that the extension that South Africa has been asking for has not been granted. With key industries in South Africa in the firing line, I have Economist Dawie Roodt joining me in the studio to unpack what this means for exporters, jobs, and the broader economy. Hi, Dawie. Thanks again for joining us.
Hello, Lena.
Well, we talked about it this before, and it's just tick tock, tick tock. There's just days left. So where are we now?
Well, the short answer is I don't know. I don't hear much. What I've heard is that the Americans said no. The Liberation Day is the 1st of August, and the tariffs, whatever it's going to be, will be implemented. So it doesn't seem to me as if the South African government understands the urgency of this, because this is really urgent. I think it's going to be really bad for the South African economy. And it seems to me as if they are just not there. They not to be found anywhere. So I don't know what's going on. Maybe there's something happening behind the scenes that I'm not aware of. So
Well, if they ask, it needs to happen pretty quick.
yeah, indeed. And of course, the real issue here is that it's not really going to impact, if the 30% is actually applied, it's not going to impact that much on the South African economy. It's probably going to shave off point something of economic growth. But the context is that we've got an economy that's hardly growing, and everything just keeps on adding up. And I'm not so sure this is the last scene of Donald Trump. I think Donald Trump, and he's got he's got many much bigger sticks in the White House that they can use against South Africa. So if he doesn't like South Africa's international diplomatic positions, for example, or if he doesn't like some other things, domestic things that's happening in South Africa, there's a lot more that he can do. But it seems to me at this stage, well, since the AGOA is gone, I can't see how AGOA can survive this. But it seems to me at this stage, if the 30% is probably going to be applied.
Well, even if it won't affect the GDP that much, some sectors are exposed.
Yeah.
Who are they?
Yeah. Some sectors of the South African is more exposed than others. Typically, for example, the motor industry and certain parts of the agricultural industry. But you're right, we're not talking about much impact on the South African economy. About 0.1, 0.2% on an economy that's only expanding at a rate of 0.7 or 0.8% is a big deal, actually. If we talk about an economy that's growing at 4 or 5%, 0.1 or 0.2 doesn't make that much difference to economic growth. But the South African economy has been really underperforming for a very, very long time. And the reason why the economy has been underperforming has to do with a government that is just implementing the wrong policies, a government that's quite often incompetent, and a government that's quite often corrupt. So, and we can see this now. I mean, I call this incompetence if there's not really happening behind anything much happening behind the scenes. So this is another example of how the ANC is actually undermining the South African economy, because they've dragged their feet. They are not coming with some sort of deal with Donald Trump. Now, we can argue about the Americans or Donald Trump being unfair. We can argue and we can call him a bully. You can call him whatever you want to, but the reality is that he's the biggest bully on the playground. And you better go and talk to this guy, because he can really hurt us. And I think this is going to hurt the South African economy as well.
So what impact would it now have that the EU managed to get a deal of 15% tariffs, which means, what does it mean for Americans who buy South African cars? If they can get it from the EU at 15%, which is a Mercedes or, anything European, what impact would it have on the automotive industry?
Well, our levies on the motor car industry at the moment is 25%, so it's going to be more. It's going to be more severe, the levies on the South African economy. But remember also is that the South African motor industry has been getting this huge indirect subsidy for many, many years. And despite this huge subsidy for many years, they still cannot compete internationally. And now we have to compete against the Europeans, as an example, and they are levied to 15% levy, while we will be getting a 25% levy. It just goes to show what the impact on the South African economy, broadly speaking, is because of things like, for example, a lack of electricity and many other issues that we have in South Africa. So we've got a subsidy, and now we will have an additional levy compared to the Europeans, and still we won't be able to compete internationally. So now I'm afraid the motor car industry, and we can already see that the exports to the United States from the motor car industry is being affected quite severely. So that's an industry that's certainly going to battle over the next couple of years.
And what about job losses? Is it possible to estimate how many jobs will be lost because of this?
Well, according to the Reserve Bank, we're talking about 100,000 jobs that will be lost. But again, the context here that's really that matters. We've got unemployment levels in South Africa, depending on what definition you use, but we've got probably around about 10 million people in South Africa without jobs. Those are the official numbers. So add another 100,000 to that. 100,000 in itself is not that many jobs, but 100,000 on top of 10 million unemployed people already. We're talking about some serious numbers here. So we're talking about huge increase on top of the high levels of unemployment in South Africa already. But also important is that certain regions will be affected. For example, East London will be affected. The region in the Eastern Cape, for example, will be affected quite much more than many other places. And also Pretoria, by the way, where I stay. There are also major motor car manufacturers in Pretoria, and that will be affected as well. So yeah, certain areas, certain industries will be more affected than others.
Well, could a pivot to the EU or Asia or even Africa, could that help to ease this pressure that's going to come from the US?
No, well, we can try to export to Africa, but Africa is a poor continent. Africa does not buy Mercedeses. We can try, and there certainly is a market, but Africa's got some other challenges. We've got the African Free Trade Agreement that is just not used properly. That is actually an opportunity, but not much is really happening on that front. If you want to export to the East, I'm afraid that's not going to happen because the Chinese, they've captured that market completely and totally. In fact, the Chinese are making life very difficult for the local motor car industry as well. So no, Africa perhaps, maybe some European countries that we can export to, but this is a major loss. We export certain models to the United States, and to get somebody else to take, that's not going to be easy.
You mentioned about the effect on macroeconomics, the GDP. What about the rand's value and inflation?
That's an interesting one. The rand is, in fact, undervalued. If not much happens, then the rand should actually appreciate because it is already hugely undervalued. So I think the answer to that is that we are already paying quite a dear price for all sort of things that's been going wrong in South Africa. And we pay it by way of a currency that is quite significantly undervalued. If there are more tariffs implemented, if the 30% tariff becomes a reality in South Africa, then I think the short-term reaction of that will be that the rand will take a bit of a knock on the capital market as well. But I don't think it will be a long-term thing. I think the fact that we have relatively high interest rates in South Africa, which makes the rand actually quite attractive from an interest rate point of view, is likely to support the currency. So I'm not too concerned about the currency.
And inflation?
The same goes for inflation. Inflation is actually fed by a currency that's all over the place. And recently what we've seen is that the rand actually appreciated quite nicely. And with, like I've said, high interest rates, that will support the exchange rate of the currency as well. And we know Lesotho Kganyago is a very, very conservative central banker, and he's likely to keep interest rates relatively high. I think there is room for a rate cut, and I believe that the Reserve Bank will cut rates this week, in fact. But even after a 25 bips reduction in interest rates remain fairly high in South Africa. So the currency I'm not too concerned about, and that goes for inflation as well.
So if that 30% tariff kicks in, how long before we can see what the real effect of that's going to be on the South African economy and growth?
When you make any change to any price in the economy, whether that is interest rates, whether that is change in petrol price or some sort of levy, whatever, it takes up to 2 years before the whole thing works its way through the economy. So we will get an initial reaction, certainly, like what we've discussed, but to determine what the long-term impact is will take some time. We know it's going to be negative. We know that the financial markets already already reacted to that to an extent. And I think if the 30% becomes a reality, quite often what you find is that the market reaction is not negative, but actually positive because there's an uncertainty that has been removed now. So yeah, before we know what the impact will be, it will take some time. But what we do know, and that is that the impact on the South African economy because of the wrong macroeconomic policies, we've been feeling that for many, many years already.
Dawie, do you think there's a quid pro quo deal like Swaziland that took in prisoners or anything like that that could dissuade Trump administration from imposing a 30% tariff on South Africa?
Will we get Donald Trump to change his mind as far as the tariffs are concerned if we are prepared to take prisoners from the United States? I really doubt that. I think Donald Trump, he's got issues He's got issues on things like, for example, expropriation and South Africa's international political position. I think that's far more important to him. Taking a couple of prisoners, it's not going to make much of a difference, I think.
Dawie Roodt, thank you so much for speaking to us.